Assalamu alaikum. My dear friends, I'm going to deal with an extremely important topic, and I want to clarify something to you that I hope at the end of this video you will have seen a bit more clearly the way forward. Because we're living in a time of despair, I believe. A time when you might feel directionless, or you might feel that there are so many scholars, there are so many books, so many people narrating to you a version or an understanding of your deen and of the Quran, that you might feel confused or bewildered. So I think maybe I can offer you some clarity in the middle of all of that, overwhelming avalanche of information. Now, I want to come back to the best understanding of the idea of Sunnah. Because I believe, that is my belief, and I feel I'm capable to make this opinion. I've spent many, many, many years studying and reading the Deen of Islam, reading the books, the hadiths. I have memorized hundreds, maybe 1,000 hadiths or more myself. I know the hadith books. I spent, in today's money, 100,000 or more, maybe, in our currency, maybe in dollars, tens of thousands of dollars, in purchasing hadith books, in reading those books, in studying it. And I've spent most of the past 7 years reading and rereading the Holy Qur'an, understanding the Arabic, learning the terminology. And I'm also a social activist. I've been from the age of 17 interested in making the Qur'an, making my deen be a factor in the real world, improving society, improving my own condition, that of my family, that of my broader society, Muslim and non-Muslim. And so I feel I have a position or a level of understanding. I think I can speak with a reasonable amount of authority to you in this video. Because I'm not waking up yesterday and deciding I need a new hobby, and this is my new hobby. I'm going to challenge everything that Muslims believe in. Now, I'm driven by love, by compassion, and by a earnest and sincere intention to improve the condition of my people. Now, you as a Muslim, especially the majority, 90% Sunni Muslims in the world, your understanding, your schooling has taught you that we must just continue doing what we are doing. This is the condition that we are experiencing, of poverty, of conquest, of humiliation, of usurpation, of oppression, of being ruled over by idiots and by scoundrels and by thieves. This is just Allah's test. This is your understanding, right? When you see that disheartening events in Palestine, you see the disheartening events in Afghanistan, everywhere on the news, your mind is trying to find an answer, and your clergy, your priests, your Muslims, your eminent Muslim authorities, your sheikhs, your maulanas, your ayatollahs, they are telling you that this is the test of Allah. We need to persevere. You need to, double up on the Sunnah, double up on the Hadith, double up on crying for the Ahlul Bayt, just double up on these things, keep on doing it, and we will win through. And then they will interpret the Quran for you in that way, that, you need to suffer more, because one day it will come. Freedom will come. But I'm here to tell you now that you are so mistaken, seriously mistaken, my dear friends. You could not be more mistaken. You see, the problem that we are suffering is not one of the test of Allah. It is one of the consequences of Allah. We are not living in the era of test. You see, we are not living in that era, because then there would be hope. But there is no hope. There is no leadership. There is no direction. We are living in the time of despair. And so we are not living in the era of being tested. We are living in the time of consequences. And what we are experiencing is not the test of Allah, but really the adab, the consequences of our own mistaken practices. And that is what I want to talk to you about. If you don't want to realize that, then you should just accept that you will live your lives in despair. Your children might have it worse, and we as a generation would not have risen to the responsibility which we have on our shoulders. And so I'm here to ask you, let us immediately refrain from saying we must do more of the same and let us take a new direction. Now, I want to address this core mistake that was made right at the outset. You see, when the Prophet ﷺ was around, he was the undisputable judge, the authority, the leader, the guide, the lawmaker, the Amir. He was everything in one man, and he was divinely appointed. And when he passed away, he left behind what we call now a Sunnah. Right? Now that Sunnah is technically in the Qur'an refers to the Sunnah of Allah. But let us quickly assume that the Prophet left a Sunnah. Now that Sunnah, the mistaken understanding is that these books, 500,000 hadiths in Bukhari Muslim, constitute the Sunnah of the Nabi. And if you open these books, you will find the Prophet used to go to the toilet like this, he used to wash his hands like that, he used to wear this kind of clothes, and women, you will mostly find the trivial elements of the Sunnah. The Sunnah of the Prophet, the word Sunnah means the way, the tradition, the legacy, the means, the method, the approach. That is the Sunnah of Muhammad alayhi salam. And it's not difficult. If I tell you what is the nature of your father, what was his essence, what was his Sunnah, right? If you have a father that's passed away, right, or a grandfather, I'm sure you can in a few sentences tell me what was his Sunnah. The Sunnah of my father was he worked hard, he never cheated, he was kind to his children, he loved his wife. You can summarize the Sunnah of your father in just a few quick sentences, and that provides a basis, a framework for how you should abide by that Sunnah. Now that goes the same for the Prophet. You see, these 500,000 hadiths that were written, they do not, the core mistake, it was made 300 years after the death of the Prophet. That mistake was made a few centuries after the Prophet. The mistake was that if we compile in everything that Muhammad and Abdullah and this one and that one said, that the Prophet said, we would have compiled a grand picture of the Sunnah. And so they put 500,000 hadiths into all these hundreds of books and they said that is the Sunnah. But they have actually confused the forest for the trees, because you see, now you have a case where you get a guy like Muawiyah who killed, who stole, who committed excesses, who lived everything except the Sunnah. He was everything except the Sunnah of Muhammad, but yet he calls himself a Sunni, or people call him a Sunni. You see, because you get Imam Ali and you get the Muawiyah. Or okay, let's look at modern days. You get the kings of Saudi Arabia and of UAE and of Morocco and Jordan and all these kings, right? Or the president, the prime minister of whatever Muslim country. Do they embody the spirit of the Prophet? The spirit of modesty, the spirit of humility, the spirit of justice, the spirit of kindness, the spirit of jihad, fighting for those who are oppressed? Any of them? Be honest. No, they don't. If you are being dead honest with yourself, they are Sunnis, but they don't follow the Sunnah. They are Hadithists. They are Bukhari followers, but they don't follow the Sunnah. They know how to brush their teeth with a stick. They know how to put their fingers in the salah. They know how to, what kind of hat and how to fold their scarf. But they don't embody justice. They don't embody honesty. They don't embody bravery and courage. They don't embody benevolence, mercy, love. And least of all do they embody the precepts of the Holy Quran. So the problem that we are facing as a Muslim global nation is that we are suffering the consequences of trading the real Sunnah for this false Sunnah. It's a book of, I'm not saying it's a book of lies, and I'm not saying there's nothing good in these hadith books, but as a whole, they deviate, they confuse the real Sunnah with hadiths that Hamad and Abdul and whoever else said about the Prophet. I gave you an example of your father. If you have to summarize his life, you might tell stories about him. You might say he used to, get up early and make salah, whatever. You might tell a detailed incident, But if you really want to project or represent your father or your grandfather who was passed away, you will talk about the ethos, the approach, the style, the way of the man. And that is where we have missed the point completely. You see, the ethos of the Prophet, the style, the attitude is embodied in the Qur'an. And the Qur'an is the life of the Prophet. The life of the Prophet is one of love for God. Taqwa is one of courage, fighting for the oppressed, is one of moderation, trying to restrain himself from excess. Kulu washrabu wa la tusrifu. He did not overindulge. He did not over-enrich himself. The Sunnah is missing, my friends. That is where we've gone wrong. We've picked these 500,000 books and all these false scholars for dollars who try and promote these books. Do you see the problem is? Right back in the past, when Muawiyah, Yazid, Abdul Malik, and all these corrupt sultans, when they realized that they don't want to follow the Sunnah, the real Sunnah, which means they had to live humble lives, they had to not persecute the innocent, they had to do justice to those who are just and who stand for what is. When they decided they want to turn Islam into their personal means of enrichment and advantage for themselves, they had to replace the real Sunnah with the Sunnah. And that is why they identified people like Abu Huraira to come with nonsensical details about the Prophet, and to turn that into the Sunnah. That is the problem that you are facing today, and it's not a new problem. You see, your Islam, our Qur'an, our deen will not emerge, it will not rise until we correct our understanding of the Sunnah. You know what will happen is, if by any chance, and there is almost no chance, you should tomorrow become the ruling power in the world, you will become a corrupt ruling power because your kings and your leaders are corrupt. They are not beholden to the Quran. They will spread corruption and facade and evil more even than the Anglo-Saxons or the people who are currently ruling the planet. They will create more despair, more corruption. So you are not ready to rule. The day that we wake up, and I'm here to tell you this, the day we wake up and say, listen, let's take all these books and stop using them as a guide. Let's use the Quran, and let's use the broad image, the broad Sunnah, the ethos of the Prophet. That is the Sunnah. Technically, the Sunnah means the Sunnah of Allah, which is the fitrah, the natural disposition which God has created man in. That is the Sunnah. But let's say we want to follow the Sunnah of Muhammad. If we want to be Sunnis, we need to be people of justice, people of jihad, people of courage, people of kindness, people of benevolence, people who are not obsessed with nonsense, with the way they carry their hair and the way they keep their fingers when they pray, and the way they walk and the way they talk and the way they go to the toilet. You see, now you're going to ask me, but Anwar, we need to understand the details because the Sunnah is in the details. Well and good. Let me give you this challenge. Think about this. And I'm here to make you think, not to tell you stories. You see, if you tomorrow leave your home and you leave your children, say you have a number of children and you have a wife there. If you leave all of them at home, right? Let's say you're leaving on a month-long business trip and you leave them at home. And you tell them, listen, here's Bukhari. If anything goes wrong, just open Bukhari and read. You'll find the answers in there. Do you think you'll have helped them by telling them such nonsense, by giving them such stupid advice? Don't you think that's a dumb way of leaving your family and telling them go to these books when you have a problem? What will you do? What you will do is you will say to them, listen, I'm going away. You know how I deal with things. If anything comes up and you can't get hold of me, speak to your mom. Or if the mom isn't well, speak to you might appoint, you have an eldest daughter, maybe who's a very wise person. You might say, let my eldest daughter, Amina, let her be the person that you ask. She knows most my business. What you will do is you will invest somebody with authority. Now, the people who argue for the Sunnah, they use a number of verses in the Qur'an. I'm getting to the point of this video. You see, the people who argue for these millions of hadiths, they look at a number of Qur'an verses, right? And then they use those verses to argue that that is why there is a Sunnah. Now, I've taken those verses out. Here are those verses. Qur'an 480. It says, and this is how people argue for hadith. I'm here to wake you up and to tell you the right thing. The Qur'an 480 says, obedience to the messenger is obedience to God, which is a beautiful verse. So they say that is why we need Sunnah, why we need hadith books, because in the hadith books you get the messenger's idea. Or they say, Qur'an 459, you who embrace the scripture, obey God, obey the messenger, and those within your ranks will possess. So they say, if we don't have Bukhari, how can we obey the messenger? And 2463 says, let those who undermine the messenger's command be warned that they will be afflicted by serious social upheaval. So they say, we need to obey the Prophet's command, and so forth and so forth. The problem is that how can the Prophet command you when he's no longer there? You see, how can the Prophet command you when he's no longer there? So the verses that we are looking at here in front of us, and there are some more, they're all in that, more or less in that tone. The verses are not here to tell you to follow hadith books, but the verses are here to entrench the idea of what we call wilayat. You see, those verses are there to tell you that you need to respect the authority that is in charge, the person that I leave in charge. Now, when the Qur'an was revealed, the Nabi Muhammad alayhi salam was in charge. He was invested with that authority. And the people of his time were instructed to obey him and to follow him and not to question him. In fact, there's a very, very beautiful one here. Let me show you this one, where the Qur'an says, you embrace this one here. Let those who undermine the messenger's command be warned that they will be afflicted by serious social upheaval, or that they will meet with painful suffering. You see, if you ignore the commands of the Prophet, or if you undermine the commands of the Prophet, you are sowing the seeds of civil war. You are sowing the seeds of discord, of upheaval, social upheaval. And that is what Allah, God, warned the people of the Prophet's time. Now we come to the time after the Prophet. These verses are all to be applied with respect to the current legitimate authority that we have to identify. You see, you cannot replace a man with a book. That is what people imagine, is that you can take the practices of the Prophet and just apply it from the 6th century, 7th century to the 21st century. You cannot do that. You see, the verses here are referring to an authority. The best of you, the righteous of you, needs to be identified as the authority. Now let's grant it, after the time of the Prophet, there were Khulafa al-Rashidin. There were Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali. And it ended with Ali, where the men of God were ruling. The men of the Sunnah were ruling. You see, when the men of the Sunnah were ruling, who followed the method of humility, of justice, of not killing indiscriminately, not looting the public treasury, when those people were ruling, they were more or less guided by the Sunnah. When the scoundrels took charge, and the scoundrels took charge with Muawiyah, and the scoundrels have not left that position of power until today. You see, the scoundrels have ruled non-stop from that time, maybe with one or two exceptions. Maybe Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, the grandson the son of Abdul Malik, I think, the fourth or fifth Umayyad Caliph. Maybe there was a bright light in the darkness, but for most of the 1450 years since the final Caliph Ali ruled, we were ruled by scoundrels, by brigands, by thieves, by pickpockets, by criminals. And still today we are ruled by criminals who abandon the Sunnah. And these verses, what these verses are saying is that if you do not abide by the Sunnah of the Prophet, the method of rule of the Prophet. You see, the Prophet was an authority of his time. He left behind an authority. He left behind a legacy, a method of rule. And it says here, obey God, obey the messenger and those within your ranks who possess authority. The Prophet established a rule of justice, a rule of knowledge, a rule of taqwa, of godliness. And that is the legacy. And the Qur'an commands us to perpetuate that legacy of the messenger. Not the legacy of Bukhari, not the legacy of Ibn Kathir. Those are not legacies. A legacy is an overall practice. And what we've done is we've abandoned that legacy. When we look at wilayat, which I'm saying is the Quran is speaking about wilayat. Wilayat means invested with authority or command, right? Now, we have abandoned the rightful, righteous command. We have abandoned righteous command, prophetic command, the command that is based on the Sunnah, on the tradition of the Prophet. That wilayat we have abandoned. And that is why we will suffer for another 1,000 years. The proofs used for hadiths in the Qur'an are in fact proofs for wilayat, for righteous command. And that is, what is righteous command? Righteous command is none less than righteous governance. It consists of executive powers, in other words, the right to command, to instruct, to execute, judicial powers, the right to judge, to make judgments, in other words, the hukm, and legislative, the fiqh, the right to deduce the law or to create or institute the law. So you have the judicial, the executive, and the legislative branches. And that is really what these verses are speaking about. But now you're running around saying every day that, you know what, the Sunnah of the Prophet is how you must wipe your feet, how you must keep your hands, how you must spit and scratch in your nose and whatever nonsense, is because that version of the Sunnah is the version that is imposed on you. That is the version of the Qur'an and of Islam that takes you to La La Land. And if you want to spend your life in La La Land and never come out to reality, by reality I mean established true command, the true command of Allah, the command that is inherent or implicit in these verses. You see, these verses are not telling you to follow the way that the Prophet went to toilet and so on. It's telling you follow the way of the Quran, follow the way of justice, follow the way of fighting for the weak, feeding the hungry. That is what these verses are telling you. And when you read it, that is how you should read it. Let's read these verses. Let's read them. Read this. You embrace the scripture. Respond to God and respond to the messenger, i.e., to the righteous authority when he invites you to that which will revive you. In other words, when we establish righteous leadership, when we establish the office of wilayat, which is righteous, you will be revived. You see, respond to that which will revive you. That is really the crux of the Sunnah, of emulating the Prophet. Let's look at this one. It does you embrace the scripture, obey God, obey the messenger and those within your ranks who possess authority. Should it happen that you fall into dispute about anything, then refer it back to God and the messenger. The messenger here must not be read as the Prophet Muhammad in our time, but should be read as those who emulate, those who live the Sunnah of Allah, the Sunnah of the Qur'an, the Sunnah of Muhammad. You see, the Sunnah is not invested in books. The Sunnah is invested in the character, in the behavior of those who are righteous, who are brave, who are the true followers of Allah and of Muhammad. So if you come and you tell me I'm a Sunni, I'm a Saudi Sunni Muslim, then I'm asking you, but where's the Sunnah of the Prophet in your country? Where's the Sunnah of the Prophet in your king? You see, and we will not return to a position of eminence or power as long as we don't correct our understanding of what the Sunnah is. Remember what I told you. If you leave tomorrow, you leave your children and your wife and whoever at home, you cannot leave them with a book and say the answers are in here. You need to leave them with an individual. You need to appoint somebody. The Sunnah is, or the verses that pertain to the authority of the Prophet in the Quran, all of these verses that I've shown you are all telling you that we need to invest power in righteous leaders, righteous authorities, not scholars for dollars, not popularity seekers, not sellouts that are selling out to the enemy. How can you be a leader of Muslims? Then Muslims come and they tell me, but Erdogan is a great leader. What is wrong with him? He's a member of NATO. How can you walk with your oppressor and call yourself a Sunni or a Muhammadi? How can you call yourself a Sunnah, a man of the Sunnah, if you're walking with the enemy, the atheist enemy? You are a member of NATO. Then some of them say, but King Muhammad of Jordan is a righteous man. No, he's not. He's a man of excess. He's a man of injustice. He's a man who's ripping off his country's wealth. You are appointing scoundrels and claiming to be Sunnis. You will be Sunnis one day when you appoint people who follow the Sunnah to rule over you. That is the day you will become Sunnis, and that is the day you will follow the Sunnah, and that is the day that Allah will look upon you with compassion or with pity. Until that day, as long as you pick the shaitani leaders over God's leaders, over the righteous, you will be made to suffer the consequences. I ask you, my brothers, let us re-establish that authority, and let us move forward with playing our role as the liberator of mankind from slavery of man by man. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.